So now joining, we're talking about the politicking culture of Guyana. So after she had claimed by the Guyana Elections Commission that she would have won the regional and general elections, the People's National Congress sees fit to serve survey notice of the High Court stopping the swearing in of the election because there were hiccups within the declaration of the regional and general elections. And the PPP was saying, according to the Constitution, that if there were hiccups within the declarations of the elections, one must seek to do it via a way of an elections petition and not having a summons to as according to them, the duly elected president, where she took that and threw it over her shoulder, which was the Constitution. Constant protests would have brought Mrs. Jagan and the People's Progressive Party to their knees because it ended up into the CARICOM community again. And here gave the birth of the Hartmanston Accord. So she decided to step down based upon some illness. Well, Guyanese weren't no fool then, so they knew what was going on. So Sam Hines again decided to take up the realms as acting president. I think, yes, that was what happened. He stepped down or stepped aside. No, he swore in Mr. Jagdeo as prime minister. Step aside, allowing Mr. Jagdeo to become acting president. I think that happened for a day, and the next day Mr. Jagdeo was sworn in as president. And Sam Hines was then recalled as prime minister. And then everything started going overboard. Mr. Jagdeo, realizing the powers that he had within his hands, started thinking in that aspect. So what happened in 2000 regional general elections, it was contested and then it was declared that he was the winner. After that, there comes the birth of a whole lot of things. A whole lot of stuff was changed up. The police force became more political. I think they were trying to bring the army in such a phase, but they had a lot of rebellion from senior army officers. I think one of the most rebellious one was Mr. Edward Collins, who Mr. Jagdeo never really liked. But Mr. Jagdeo, realizing that they will always have problems in local government elections because they would never have a majority of the proportional representation. So in the House, which is considered the National Assembly. I think they knew that they would not have the kind of grip that they needed as lawmakers to take charge of that National Assembly. So what he did was to make sure that all independent agencies of the Constitution becomes dependent on the Ministry of Finance to fund them. So the Ministry of Finance always coming up short when to fund Guyana Elections Commission. So you wouldn't have local government elections. So after all these mayoral posts, means mayor, would have exceeded their time, as he thinks, because he thinks he has executive powers. He now created an interim management committee. The only person he couldn't move from their post was Hamilton Green, because Hamilton Green would have said to him on more than one occasions, as mayor of Georgetown City, that in order for him to remove as mayor is via way of an election. And you would have had to have local government elections where councillors would have been re-elected and would have choose the mayor of Georgetown. After that expiry date and no councillor was being re-elected, you cannot ask the same councillors of the via elections that would have passed to choose a new mayor when there weren't no electoral procedures that would have happened by the local government commission nor the Guyana Elections Commission. The thing is that Mr. Jagdeo seemed to want to have his executive powers insulate upon the commissions and upon the executive arms that makes up the government. So he controlled the high courts by doing that. He makes sure that the high court's budgetary offices falls under the Ministry of Finance. So the judges wouldn't have the kind of finances to have certain cases done. The courts will run short of finance and monies, and that will prevent the court and their judges from acting. Judges were not paid on time. Everything was happening downhill. But for one particular reason, I'm sorry Mr. Ian Chang is not alive at this time, because he was I think he was the Chief Justice then. And he had a pivotal role in how should I put it, advising Mr. Jagdeo. So what had happened over that period of time, you saw executive powers being handed out. Like, for instance, let's use Mr. Mark Benchcap. Mr. Mark Benchcap was in prison because he was advocating on behalf of Guyanese for the freedom of speech, the freedom of civil rights, the freedom of liberty, the freedom of human rights. And he realized that the dictatorial manner of Mr. Jagdeo and the PPP was taking Guyana places that they would never imagine it would have met. Guyana has become so terrible that human trafficking was one of the main economic goals, other than narcotics trade, under Mr. Jagdeo. And the constant barrage of executive powers upon the nation, where all these things were taken. You could imagine you are employed by the government as a permanent secretary, and your instructions comes from the executive office. Then you can't say anything. But a lot of people did not know that their offices as a public servant or as a public official or a high public official, let us say the permanent secretaries, their offices came with constitutional instructions, handbook of instruction that comes from the Constitution, how a permanent secretary must run a ministry. The minister is guided by the instructions of the permanent secretary, how a ministry should operate. A lot of them don't know that. So what they did, they made the permanent secretary's position a political position. So how did he do that? He took away that powers from the Public Service Commission, where all public servants under the Public Service Commissions are guided and protected by what you call rules, laws, and guidelines. So there's no interference with the government. So after he did that, and how he did that is to make sure that the Public Service Commission could not have functioned after its time would have expired. Another executive brief. So after the Public Service Commissions would have expired, the time, that is when he put the majority of the public servants on contract. Salaries were nice. They had what you call like every 6 months you're being paid a gratuity. So in case that they don't want to renew your contract in a year, you already have two gratuity within a year. That's how the money started sharing out, because they have lots of persons on the public service payroll that came via way of contract from the government. Persons who they like and persons who they do not like, they put on contract. So after that time, they would have given up. And a lot of people didn't know that. A lot of public servants didn't know what was going on. So after the Public Service Commission wasn't functioning, he started holding on to the dues of the Public Service Union. So when you would have paid your dues, the Public Service Union wouldn't have been getting the dues. And they said to them, look, you got to go pay it personally to the Public Service Union account. And there and then, you were now, once you're going to pay to the Public Service Union account, you are now seen as a PNC, because the leader of the Public Service Union is Patrick Yard, which is a black man. So automatically, he automatically becomes the People's National Congress reform component or attached to the PNC. So the marginalization was stepping all the time. There were certain things that happened that stepped in and gave these marginalizations good effects. And then he was capitalizing on it. He was making sure that the African community or the African population falls under the pockets of the PPP, because they would have controlled every economic entity whilst Jack Dio was government, was president, as a matter of fact. So after that happened, he turned to the police force and realizing that there were certain elements in the police force. For one instance, Mr. Paul Slow. Little do we know, Mr. Larry Lewis was also an element. But he couldn't have got over Mr. Larry Lewis that much because he knew the constitution of his office. And then after getting rid of Larry Lewis, and all these others came in, like Henry Green and McDonald and all these people, that was, to me, a waste of time. You're finding that the the credibility of the police force were being lost because no one was locked up based upon charges. Everybody was locked up based upon political understanding. And the persons who were in the narco trade was also controlled by Mr. Jack Dio. For one man, Mr. Roger Khan. And you find all these things started heaping up, and it becomes a violation to human rights, a violation to civil rights, a violation to the rights of liberty and freedom of movement, because people were blacklisted and the police force had to listen to them. The judicial system had to listen to them. You couldn't jump on a plane and go where you got to go because you're becoming a political prisoner like Mr. Benchcar, who was charged without no evidence. Without no evidence of planning to overthrow a government. Without no evidence at all. And he was held for 5 years in prison because of executive lawlessness, which is executive brief. The executive brief would have been taken constantly from the Judicial Service Commission and all these people. So what had happened over a period of time, Mr. Jagdeo realized that all these commissions were independent of the executive rule, especially the Guyana Elections Commission. Especially the Guyana Elections Commission. So persons now who would want to adopt and take up the position of commissioner of the Guyana Elections Commission, of Guyana Elections Commissioners, that's the post really. The person becoming chairperson of the Guyana Elections Commission of Commissioners. Because the person who really conducts and also run the Guyana Elections Commission is the Central Executive Officer, or the Chief Elections Officer. My apologies. That's the person who controls and runs the Guyana Elections Commission, not Claudette Swing. Claudette Swing's position is to take briefing from the CEO, the Chief Elections Officer, who would now ask her for these approval among the commissioners. Like what happened a couple days ago. They elected a CEO for the Guyana Elections Commission without all 6 commissioners present. That is unconstitutional. The Constitution says in an election for the CEO, the Chief Elections Officer, all commissioners must be present. 3 from the governing side, 3 from the opposition side, and 1 is a chairperson. You can't have 3 persons sitting there by themselves with the chairperson of the Guyana Elections Commission to elect a chief elections officer via way of an unconstitutional actions. So that is action number 1 for Ms. Claudette Swing. So let us go back to Jack Dio. So after Jack Dio realizes that the Caribbean Court of Justice and the Caribbean is not really in favor of the PPP, he went to Parliament and changed that specific law. Articles 25.5 in 2004. Mr. Corbyn then was opposition leader. Because in 2004, that amendment was passed, that constitutional amendment that says, Article 25.5, that according to Guyana Constitution, that the appellate courts is the last place for every electoral matters for the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And that was passed unanimously in Parliament. So that means to say that you will not have another Mrs. Jagan, where it had to go to the Caribbean community after the CCJ I was trying to, yes, they kind of blackmailed there for a little couple of seconds. So what had happened? He doesn't want the Caribbean because he realized every matter is now from the opposition, would be left to the CCJ, which is CCJ suddenly or sometimes doesn't take sides. There's no money involved. So you can't get a comfortable ruling on the CCJ. So he makes sure that the CCJ doesn't have a ruling on any electoral matters. To those who are looking, according to Articles 25.5 of the Constitution, the Representation of the People's Act. So it kicks out the PPP, the CCJ, having any ruling over any electoral matters, either be electoral matters pertaining to ROPA, the Representation of the People's Act, electoral matters against pertaining to an elections petition, according to the Representation of the People's Act, where the appellate court is the last place for that. He himself rallied on that particular topic. The reason why he changed all these things up, because he saw 10, 15 years ahead that if he doesn't change certain things, the PPP would never, ever, like how they have never won an election unanimously. They have never won an election, ever won an election. It's always a 5-seat majority, a 1-seat majority. They have never won an election. They don't have the constituency to do so. And because they know that, they were preparing the ways for every election. Make sure you have the right chief elections officer there. I don't trust this one that we have. As a matter of fact, not that I don't trust him. This one that we have is a PPP. You understand what I mean? So what what's his name? The opposition leader, I already forgot his name. Mr. Harman is doing to recognize the presence of him. It's ridiculous. Number two, the manner in which he is being elected to the post is unconstitutional. Because you have 3 commissioners, elections commissioners. You remember during the elections time when the 3 PPP elections commissioners were rejecting and they were making a lot of noise, and then she called them back to reason. She wasn't doing here with the same. These 3 black ones, them in name sing. So they got put one side. Because them a PPP, PNC, I mean, sorry. None of them in name sing. So she ain't got time with them. If you understand what I mean. That is what is happening. So whether she was a perfect clause in disguise, well, that's how the PPP works. We're not waiting for the elections to come again to know how they work. They're setting the ground. They're setting the level in which they want to run. So when they started running, then constitutionally, you can't tell them that they aren't doing the right thing, but constitutionally, they're doing the wrong thing. So we're going to talk about things that are going to eventually help them to realize that they're not acting in accordance with the will of the people. So number one, Mr. Vishnu Prasad, if that is his name, is a People's Progressive Party agent. Because if you attain a post, which you know, Mr. Prasad or Mr. Vishnu, I don't think I know his name properly. If you know that you being elected to a position that has been unconstitutionally done, why did you accept it? It's plain and simple. And then give a press briefing today that words about nothing because I don't know who you're speaking to. Basically, I don't even think you're speaking to the right set of people. Number one, the first thing you're supposed to address is local government election that was already passed and gone that needs to happen. Because y'all have the monies to have local government election. It was awarded to you. You were given such amount of money. So why didn't it happen? You were always in the Guyana Elections Commission. You know what's going on. We don't want to hear unfair and clarity and no. We've been hearing that tune far too long when many of our brothers and sisters are being killed in the streets. When Jack Dio was president talking about he's a president for all Guyanese. And too many black people were being killed. And policemen who didn't follow the normal rule of law were being killed also too. Surprisingly, that the crime chief and the commissioner of police hasn't addressed these issues until now. They haven't. None of them. Members of the Guyana police force who would have been turned up dead. In Jack Dio's time, no proper investigation. The executive brief. To those who are now joining, welcome to the Wednesday Talks, the executive brief. And because these things continue to happen, Guyanese within the communities, the East Asian communities, the African communities, the Indian communities. And when I say Indian, I mean Amerindians or indigenous. And when I say East Asians, I mean those that came from India that are sitting on that particular continent or area of East Asia. Because I can't say Hindu community because they're mixed up. They're Pakistan. They're those are from the Islamic culture that came from India. And they're those that from the Hindu community, that the Hindu culture that came from India also too. So we need to understand that specific aspect. So they're known as East Asians. And they were affected. Everybody was affected. We had large, and we still have, we have large migration of those of the East Asian community that left Guyana and went abroad to seek a better life on the Barjack deal. From 1992 to 2015, the Canadian authorities and the American authorities has shows that you had a large migration of Guyanese, over 200,000 plus that left Guyana within those specific year time period, has left Guyana for betterment. And they have left Guyana within those two countries has shown over 200 something thousand. So yeah, we left out Trinidad, Barbados, Antigua, Jamaica, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. All these islands has a large population of Guyanese living, especially Suriname. And I was made to understand Venezuela had the second largest population of Guyanese living there, outside of Canada and the US. So we had a large migration period that was going on. So there isn't no constituency that the PVP has right now. The only party that's left with the constituency is the PNC, APNU, AFC. This is the only party that left right now. So it makes it harder for me to understand how can, let us say 2% of Guyanese take power take over power by a way of installation, because they were installed, take over our constitution, take over 98% of Guyanese. 2% control, taking over and control to 98% of Guyanese under a dictatorial regime, a murderous and terrorist regime led by Mr. Barjatio. Again, I gotta stop saying Mr. He's not Mr. This guy isn't human. His actions are inhumane. I believe he's just a thing with a name who doesn't know what is it to be a human being. So between 2000 and 2010, Guyana has seen the largest homicide ever in its history. Between 10 years, 1,400 plus. It is more than 1,480 Guyanese. The 1,480 Guyanese that would have died, and we would keep talking about it, are Guyanese that murders and disappearances were never solved. That's what we're talking about. Jim Jones was responsible for the disappearance of 980 Americans that were killed on the soil of Guyana. Put Guyana on a map of murderous reign by a foreigner. Now we have the president who ruled from 2010, from 2000 to 2010, who ruled between that period and has the largest genocide ever in the history of Guyana. And why I say genocide? Because according to our population, that is genocide. That is genocide. 1,480 Guyanese would have died or disappeared. Up to this day, they cannot be found. Nobody knows who killed them that had turned up dead. Policemen were involved in those disappearances also too. Business people were involved. Everybody felt that they were powerful. You have groups of the business sector that think and operated in an executive lawless manner that created the playing field for modern dictatorship. You know, after the murderous reign of Jatio, and it shows that they had a minority government of Ramatar, every inch of Guyana was being sold out in a rush without the involvement of the general public under the Ramatar administration. Every inch of Guyana was sold out in a rush because they knew somehow or the other winning a regional and general elections would have been hard this time around. So what is happening? Now you have an installed regime because the PPP cannot categorically win an election by no category at all. And we're being told constantly that they have a majority. Where is that? Where is that? They can't even have a house-to-house registration. They can't have that. There's no way that's going to turn up. Because they can never win a free and fair elections. They have to rig. a party that is now in place that won by 15,000 plus votes that would turn up to be invalid votes by 47 boxes when you count up the ballots that were counted in favor of them, not votes, ballots. And why it's ballots is because it was not identified in its validity process of voting. Over 17,000 plus. Making it hard now. And they want to make it hard for us to have a vote according to our will. Jagde doesn't want that again. So they're planning now to break up Region 4 into constituencies, 4 voting blocks. Give those that lived in the East Asian communities, on the area that has the largest population of East Asian communities, which is the smallest, in the proximity of Region 4, the largest amount of seats, and the one that has the largest population in Region 4, the smallest amount of seats. You call it disproportional representation. They're taking that away from you and hand it now to the voting blocks. Let me tell you something, Guyana. You want to know how to hold your elected representative accountable? If they go to Parliament tomorrow, as they have Parliament tomorrow, you should know those who are asking for some vote to make sure that Mr. What's his name, the opposition leader, be reinstated. They shouldn't even go and vote for Joseph Harman. They shouldn't recognize the opposition right now if they go to Parliament tomorrow. Because a lot of people don't know. If they turn up in Parliament to vote and they vote no, they still go according to the Constitution. But if they don't turn up in Parliament and don't absentee themselves in voting, constitutionally, the bill would have passed by an unconstitutional move. That's one. Number two, what makes it more worse is that they themselves know that the Speaker of the National Assembly, who is Mr. Manzoor Nadir, who we all know is PPP again, would never allow a debate on the $900 million contract of the gas to shore pipeline. And $900 million US that I'm talking about, not Guyana currency. He doesn't want that debate. So there he goes, democracy in its hand. It's being now shoveled down a rabbit hole because democracy is dead in Guyana. Dictatorialship or dictatorial style rule and policy are alive. There's no space for democracy. Tell our dunce president that, Mr. Jagde, because he doesn't know that. I don't think he knows the words that are coming out of any of our mouths because he cannot comprehend. Because a man with executive powers are being reduced to nothing, and his vice president holds all the powers. That takes away that of the prime minister, because the only person after the president that holds such powers is the prime minister. And he's supposed to be the first vice president also too, according to the Constitution. So we have unconstitutional manners in which this de facto administration, this terrorist regime, this murderous and terrorist regime that committed genocide in our country between 2000 and 2010 and has not been brought to justice for such actions are here again being supported by the business community. So these are the issues that may come up from time to time, that we as Guyanese now, because we are so ignorant of the fact, ignorant means not being knowledgeable of the fact. We're so ignorant constitutionally that we look upon our politicians to represent us. And they're not doing that. They're taking advantage of our ignorance and ruling over us with a yardstick, taking away our rights and our will. A lot of us doesn't know that our constitution of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana is the will of the people. It was designed around the will of the people. We don't know that. A lot of us don't know that. So when you stand up for your rights, it's hard. Let me show you a simple instance. Let us say there is an executive order to lock up Mr. Matthews again. With the knowledge that I have now, to come and lock me up, to come and arrest me, to take me before the station, without no evidence of a criminal effect, and ask me after to help you in an investigation to incriminate me. It's lawlessness. So how can you assist the police in an investigation to incriminate you? That is why we're all being locked up, because we're being forced by the police to ask us for evidence to incriminate you so they can make their jobs easier. So the political will of the de facto administration can go about its normal legal norms. So a lot of us don't know that we voluntarily give ourselves up. So Mr. Longhorn that came and locked me up on the Square Revolution last time, you hear what he said? He said, it is alleged that I use an electronic device to record or post some nonsense about the little child. I was locked up. I was placed on $100,000 bail. I went to court. It was placed on another $100,000 bail. You know what made me who I am that particular day? Walking down the gallows after being informed that I was being put on $100,000 court bail, walking down the gallows. I know a lot of us went down that gallows. It's a dark and dreary stairway. The only light you could have seen is at the bottom of the step, which pierced through the doors of the daylight. It invigorated me. It empowered me. It made me who I am. Gave me strength to stand up and face tyranny in its face. To teach my people the truth. Don't want to hide it from anyone. I'm not asking politicians to be truthful. I'm telling them that they must be. Mr. Joseph Harmon, Mr. Vishnu Prasad, or the new chief elections officer appointment is unconstitutional. You must have the present decisions being made by 7 commissioners, 1 independent of the 2, which is Claret Swing, be present even if their vote is nay. It's not absenteeism. It must be to show records. That is unconstitutional. If you go to court, if you go to parliament tomorrow, it makes you, Mr. Harmon, an enabler of the crimes of the PPP and your entire league of parliamentarians. So I don't care how you look at it. That's number one. If you decide to contest in any elections with that electoral body, you are now an enabler to a dictatorial regime that sits on commissions that are designed to take away the will of the Guyanese people. So I don't care what you say. No parliament. For those who enjoy the $2 million checks when the month comes, you go to parliament, it is because of your fulfillment of Mr. Jagdio's smile. You stay out of parliament, it is because you protest against that will. Mr. Joseph Harmon, you need to understand that nobody sees you no more as an opposition leader. We want the presence of Mr. Aubrey Norton to be functionable because the international community doesn't like him and the People's Progressive Party doesn't like him either, because he will show you what is it to be an opposition leader. Everybody depends upon the de facto administration to give them something. And you know why I'm saying that here tonight? It's because you're not recognizing them. So if you don't recognize them, don't go to parliament either. You go to parliament, you recognize them. You go to parliament, you recognize their governance. What are you going to parliament for? To write letters and to give speeches? No parliament. No parliament. No parliament at all. Don't go to parliament. Stay out. Stay away. Make your presence be known by protests. Don't only protest when a little boy talk about black people. Protest every day. Protest everything. Because they are unconstitutional. Every act after being installed are unconstitutional. Every act. And every act will be unconstitutional. Stand up to who you be. Show them that you're not interested. When you be a strong opposition leader like that, be resilient, vigilant, and revolutionary, then and only then people will look up to you. It's not the business community, but to me, that's your interest. Your interest is in the community of people that is in the business sector that can support you financially. Mr. Harmon, the ones that are not like the people on the ground who has a majority, who has a majority vote. There's no interest in them. So I'm helping Guyanese to know what you think of them. Nobody doesn't want to know you understand the politics of Barjatio. Understanding and talking is different from acting. You stand up there and you talk about you understanding, and people doesn't understand the nature of the politics, and we have to silently craft our moves. What silently you talking about? This man is affecting an entire nation. East Asian Guyanese also too. Because they are feeling the squeeze. The constituencies that Barjagdio says he gains his vote from, they are feeling it. Did he or did you ever tell Guyana that the country is broke? They don't have money? Did you ever say that to them? For everything we got to do is borrow right now. We have no money at all. We got to borrow. For everything we do, we got to borrow. To smile, we got to borrow money to smile. To eat, we have to borrow money to eat. To have gas in our vehicle, we got to borrow. You are talking about the gas from, what do you call it? Oil to shore pipeline to store the gas or whatever you call it. I don't even understand what is it you're doing right now. Causing you $900 million. And to build an oil refinery here, Mr. Jackie, you can remember when Donald Ramatawa's government was president, you said it will cost Guyana $500 million. Ralph Gonsalves made sure that that contract was going to his country to store Guyana's gas and to refine it through the U.S. Chambers of Commerce. Forgot that part. Today is the executive brief. It is time to talk out your secrets. That's supposed to be public knowledge. So Guyana, these things are yet still plaguing our communities. ExxonMobil cannot be involved in local content. They cannot send lawyers, or they cannot send, how you may put it over, these arbitrators to sit and to lobby on behalf of them pertaining to local content. The only persons who can create local content are Guyanese themselves. Or if they need professional help, there is the Caribbean community to do the same local content thing. Trinidad, who had a better deal than us, suffered the consequences of these oil moguls. What do you think Guyana is going to get off of 2%? Huh? Seriously? Now you want to take away the laws that are defined themselves within the National Resources Fund to suit your pockets. Mr. Harman, you only go to Parliament tomorrow. I'm letting Guyana knows. You're going there to take up seating capacity to vote nay as a government. So constitutionally, these motions can pass with a yea more than a nay. If you don't go at all constitutionally, everything becomes unconstitutional. Mr. Harman. So I'm saying to you tonight, to everybody who's looking, because apparently Gavin Matthews is not being well said about within the corners of Guyana, because I am what you call, or how you may call it, disenfranchising certain corners of their political rights. That's nonsensical. because I'm not disenfranchising anybody. I'm speaking the truth. Number two, I must say to you, to all those who are looking, there are technological glitches that are happening with me broadcasting among you. And that's the reason for the GMS Live Radio Guyana. And to those who are still interested in downloading the app, please contact me because I'm trying to get it up and running before I want to, somehow or the other, want to be independent of Facebook. Because Facebook, at the end of the day, that end of Facebook to Guyana is still controlled by the Guyanese government. So they give allegiances to those who they want to give, who may not bash them as hard like me. And for me, there's no allegiances. They restrict my digital feed, which is the streaming to those who may be interested in finding that out. So the thing is that you got to be more radical towards this government, towards this de facto administration, not the government, towards this installed terrorist regime. You got to be more vigilant. You got to be very aggressive and revolutionary, because I am not appreciating their style. I will not sit down and allow another genocide in this country. And I will speak out as every time and moment that I get to do so. Until then, stay safe, be careful, sanitize yourself, wear a mask. And don't forget the little ones you take into public places. Please remember the referendum, because it is still there. I still have more months. I have a whole year that application was being bought for. And the how should I put it over? And the GoFundMe is still there for your donations and that particular aspect of the referendum. This is Dr. Matthews saying good night and Cheerios for now.